Welcome to the presentation of the 2021 Richard Dawkins Award. My name is Robin Blumner, and I'm the head of the Center for Inquiry and the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. And I have to read the safety announcement verbatim. Woo! So, can I have your attention, please, for a moment? Welcome to the Sheldonian Theater. The event is about to begin, but before it does, could I ask you to please...
This, otherwise it could be legally culpable for...
Hi, hello, Tim. Tim, your mic is on. The event is about to begin, but before it does, could I ask you to please ensure that your mobile phones are put on silent. I would also remind you that flash photography is prohibited. The Sheldonian, if you can't already tell, is a historic grade 1 listed building. It is not designed to modern building regulations. As such, please take care in the building. Guests in the upper gallery, please ensure that you enter and leave via the access stairs in the middle and to the sides. Do not use the tiered seating steps as steps. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest available exit. The assembly point is at the far end of the quad by the Cat Street exit. Thank you and enjoy the event. All right. So the Richard Dawkins Award is presented annually to a distinguished individual from the worlds of science, scholarship, education, or entertainment who publicly proclaims the values of secularism and rationalism, upholding scientific truth wherever it may lead. Previous winners include Daniel Dennett, Cosmos co-creator Ann Drurian, the writer Ayaan Hirsi Ali, actress and writer Julia Sweeney, and your own Stephen Fry and Ricky Gervais. Tonight, I'm happy to say that the award is going to Tim Minchin because number one, the award criteria fits him to a T, and number two, because he's so frickin' awesome. In a minute, we'll welcome Tim and Richard Dawkins to the stage. They will be joined by the wonderful David Cowan, who will be tonight's interlocutor. David is a top Silicon Valley entrepreneur and investor with degrees from Harvard University in computer science, math, and business. In addition to his business acumen, he's a great humanitarian. So in the chaos of falling Afghanistan, David has recently helped hundreds of Afghan girls and their families to escape the Taliban by personally chartering flights out of the country. David helped to rescue the entire Afghan girls' robotics team and bring them to safety. CFI has worked hand in glove with David. We've raised funds, we've helped with logistics, and we've especially helped at-risk atheists escape the clutches of the Taliban. I'm very proud to have David on the board of the Center for Inquiry and to work with him on this incredible life-saving endeavor. I'd also like to thank educator and science journalist David Robert Grimes because he organized tonight's amazing event. And I want you to check out his excellent book on critical thinking called Good Thinking, Why Flawed Logic Puts Us All at Risk and How Critical Thinking Can Save the World. I think it's the only thing that can. So the organizations that I represent, the Center for Inquiry and its subpart, the Richard Dawkins Foundation, are devoted to promoting reason, science, and secularism, right there. We stand for the separation of church and state, which is something you Brits with your established church seem to be doing better than Americans these days. We also stand for the rights of atheists around the world, and we stand for the elimination of pseudoscience wherever it arises. In other words, we are the ground troops for the Enlightenment, that set of ideas that changed the trajectory of human outcomes, doubling lifespans and bettering all our lives. And we've put this event on tonight for you, the people in this room who are our partners in the battle for the Enlightenment. So tonight, for one night only, you are in a nonsense-free zone. There will be no nonsense spoken here. The only ideas on offer will be those based in logic, critical thinking, and evidence, with a few laughs thrown in just for effect. So, if you're a naturopath, or if you practice homeopathy, this is not your night. If you think that prayer put your cancer in remission rather than that course of chemotherapy, you might try looking for the nearest exit, or if you stick around, you might learn a thing or two. And if you think you're psychic, well, you may predict what I'm going to say next, which is that you've come to the wrong place at the wrong time. And if you think QAnon is real, and you don't want a COVID vaccine because you're doing your own research, perhaps you should do it somewhere else, because the only thing you'll find here is science and truth, which is clearly not your cup of tea. So tonight is a celebration of the cerebrum, a mashup of two great thinkers, Richard Dawkins and Tim Minchin, who have starved nonsense of oxygen in order to give breath to reason and science, and how much dimmer the world would be without them. So please help me welcome to the stage Richard Dawkins, Tim Minchin, and David Cowan.
First, let me say something about this place, for those not familiar with it. It was built between 1664 and 1669, named after Gilbert Sheldon, Archbishop of Canterbury, who paid the entire cost of it. Bishops were the Bill Gateses and Warren Buffetts of their time. The architect was a then inexperienced Christopher Wren, in his 30s. His model was a D-shaped Roman amphitheater, but that would have been open to the sky, not suitable for our climate. So he had to put a roof on. It was a flat roof, and supporting pillars would not have worked, would have spoiled the Roman look. So he took the daring step of making the flat roof strong enough to span the necessary 70 feet. The flat ceiling, which you can see up there, was painted by Robert Streeter, sergeant painter to the newly restored King Charles II. It was painted in his London studio as 32 panels, which were shipped to Oxford by barge down the Thames, and then assembled in place. The picture is titled "Truth Descending Upon the Arts and Sciences," and it was supposed to depict the triumph of the arts and sciences over brutish, scoffing ignorance, which of course is very appropriate for this evening. Christopher Wren himself later became known as England's leading architect, an artist in other words. He was also a scientist, distinguished enough to be elected president of the Royal Society. We are honoring this evening an artist, in this case a musician, composer, and poet, who brilliantly uses his art to uphold the values of science and the values of the Center for Inquiry: reason, science, skepticism, secularism, truth, everything we associate with the Enlightenment. I've presented this award to some pretty distinguished people in my time, but never before to such a multi-talented rock star as this. Musician, composer, poet, singer, children's author, pianist, playwright, comedian, Tim is all these things. His biopic, Rock and Roll Nerd, shows him to be, in spite of all these talents, a creature of touching humility. Ditto his article in yesterday's Guardian, by the way. But the side of him which is most relevant to us and to this award is that he is, as I've just said, a staunch upholder of rationalism, secularism, and scientific skepticism. This is epitomized in his famous beat poem, Storm, and I shall return to this. But first, I'll mention just 3 more from among his many creative contributions. There's his song, Come Home, Cardinal Pell, which, apart from displaying his musical gifts as composer and pianist, also affirms his commitment to justice. I had my own encounter with George Pell on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. That's another story. And I now turn to Tim's delightfully charming faux naive song, Thank You, God, for Fixing the Cataracts of Sam's Mum. He did show at the Albert Hall. He introduced the song with a preamble in which he tells how he was approached by a man called Sam, wearing a cross around his neck. You might wear a cross around your neck, he explains, if you're a fan of the apparatus by which first-century Romans put to death and tortured Jewish insurgents. Sam tries to trick him with a challenge that we probably all met. Do you only believe in things for which there is evidence? Yes, is the answer we'd all give, and that's the answer Tim gave. Then Sam delivers what they all think is the killer question. How about love? Do you believe in love? The answer, as we'd all give it, is, yes, I believe in love. Aha, says Sam, but you don't have any evidence for love. So far, the conversation has run on entirely familiar lines. When I get to this point in the familiar dialogue, I say something like, well, there's plenty of evidence for love, little looks in the eye, gestures, little catches in the voice. But Tim's answer was different. But love without evidence is stalking. Now that's genius. Sheer genius. I intend to use that next time the occasion arises, which it certainly will. I shall borrow it with acknowledgement, of course. Then there's the song itself. Tim pretends to be impressed by Sam's anecdote that prayer cured the cataract in Sam's mum's eyes. As we start listening, we think, hang on, Tim's become a convert. That's probably what Sam did think. But Tim was being much more subtle. He was inviting the gullible believer to walk towards him gratefully, so that the punch, when it came, would have even greater impact. It turns out that he's actually mocking the idea that God ignores the suffering of starving masses, of people suffering from incurable diseases, because he's too busy curing Sam's mum. Think about the parochial conceit of the Christian who thinks the creator of the universe, the divine physicist, the cosmic mathematician, who dreamed up quantum theory and the fundamental physical constants, the designer of the majestic expanding universe, would bother his giant head with answering prayers about one man's mum who happened to live in the Dandenong Hills, on this speck of dust in the cosmos. God doesn't care about the millions of people oppressed or suffering painful diseases all around the world. No, but this omnipotent ophthalmologist does listen to prayers emanating from one particular church belonging to just one out of hundreds of religious denominations and swoops down to fix the eyes of Sam's mum. The third song I want to mention is White Wine in the Sun, with its refrain, I really like Christmas. It's a wonderful riposte to those who think people like us are waging a war against Christmas. We aren't. We may not believe in Jesus the Redeemer, but we like the camaraderie of family all meeting together. We can like church music without believing in the words. We aren't Scrooges or Grinches, and Tim is our poet minstrel to prove it. But I said I'd come back to Storm. Many of us here will be familiar with it. It's a lovely beat poem about a dinner party, a London dinner party, where a fellow guest called Storm spouts idiotic cliches about homeopathy, auras, and the soul. Tim listens until he can bear it no longer, and then lets her have it with both barrels. He recites the story rather than sings it, but you almost don't notice that because there's so much music in the words, the rhythmic cadences, the witty rhymes and half-rhymes. Furthermore, the story and the way he tells it is genuinely funny, an exhibition of concise, sharp wit. The poem begins by setting the scene of the North London dinner party so vividly we can see every detail, even the details that aren't mentioned, and that's true artistry. We picture the foolish Storm herself, epitomized in the tiny detail of the tattoo at the base of the spine. We hear her whiny voice, beautifully rendered by Tim, as she fires off cliches with startling precision, like a sniper using bollocks for ammunition. Even her name is wonderfully apt. I read it up, and it turns out it wasn't her real name, so Tim's creation of the name Storm is another masterstroke. We feel for him as he holds himself back at the silent pleading of his wife, her eyes begging him to be nice. For a while, he resists the temptation and silently endures the nonsense about homeopathy and auras and spiritualism and her misquoting Shakespeare. Then the dam bursts. He can hold it in no longer, and we are treated to a glorious rant, a princely tirade against irrational nonsense. And finally, we enter calmer waters, a lyrical paean to science, the beauty of scientific truth, the power of science to promote human welfare. Not only are the words beautifully written, they're beautifully rendered. Tim shows himself an actor as well as a poet. The eye makeup is no affectation. His eyes communicate to the audience with an eloquence to match his words. Yes, there is no immortal soul. Life is finite. But thanks to science, Tim concludes, I get to live twice as long. Twice as long to live this life of mine. Twice as long to love this wife of mine. Twice as many years of friends and wine. Now that's real poetry. It is my honor to present this award to the bard from Down Under, Tim Minchin.
Thank you. That's amazing. Can you sit down?
So I am making the tragic mistake of speaking after Richard Dawkins. But I am thrilled to help kick off Tim's big night because it's an even bigger night for me. You see, I am your #1 fan, and if you knew the disturbing truth of how obsessed I am with you, there would be a restraining order and I wouldn't be here tonight, really. And lest you think that there is no evidence for my love, I'll give you an example. I built my cozy home in the undulating hills of California, surrounded by meadows and woods and wildlife. It's a quiet, serene place where I hope to live and to die. And it has fun amenities designed to attract and amuse my kids, and hopefully one day, their kids. And maybe one day all of you, because you're all invited to come. And when you do, you will see adorned on the gate a metallic sculpture, as you see here. In the middle, there is a glass of wine surrounded by a corona of the sun's rays. And as you walk through the property, you will see gracing the walls of the house the same sculpture And thanks to the online miracle of custom logo printed corporate swag, you will also see it, the same image, on the bocce balls to the right and on the garden chess pieces. Also on the tennis balls and the billiard balls, and even the tiny ping pong balls. Yeah, the ping pong balls. That image, of course, evokes the song that Richard spoke of, White Wine in the Sun, which was the inspiration for this hillside homestead. And for those of you who haven't heard this masterpiece, White Wine in the Sun is Tim's message to his baby daughter that every Christmas, regardless of what and where life brings her, the Minchins will gather and await her arrival, chilling in the Aussie summer sun, sipping on a Sauvignon Blanc. The song is a blanket of warmth, safety, and unconditional love that every child deserves. Naturally, the lyrics of the song clarify that Tim loves Christmas despite Christianity's gross imposition on history. He sings, "I don't go in for ancient wisdom. I don't believe that just because ideas are tenacious, it means that they're worthy." But the lyrics also touch on the human, loving aspects of a holiday that slows down life and connects our families. I really like Christmas. It's sentimental, I know, but I just really like it. And with this simple reprise, Tim demonstrates the coexistence of rationality and deep human feeling. And these homages to his art remind me every day that intellect and reason should never stop us from reveling in the beautiful music, literature, arts, and tradition that bring together our families, our societies, and our cultures. And so you see, Tim, I am your biggest fan, and I was so thrilled when I heard that Richard decided to recognize you in his annual tribute to champions of free and secular thought. I immediately bought my plane ticket. I scheduled my string of COVID tests required by the UK, and I came here to participate in this year's pilgrimage to science and reason. Most importantly, so I could shake your hand, or maybe at least bump elbows. No?
Oh, wait, turn around.
And with that, I have some questions for you and Richard.
Right.
So, first question, we can confidently guess that Richard's muse is Charles Darwin. You don't like to be pigeonholed out, however, and your work strikes me more like the threesome love child of Elton John, Douglas Adams, and Tom Lehrer. Maybe you could share with us, who were your inspirations and who are your inspirations going forward?
I don't know. Can I just, this is very overwhelming, and I feel like I should have responded to all those nice things before I start talking about myself, which I'm very good at.
Please, go ahead.
You don't so much, and
floor is
thank
yours.
you. I find that you're very emotional and amazing to hear you speak of that as having a profound impact, because obviously you know, Storm or White Wine in the Sun, they were both written in the same attic in a house in Crouch End, and they're just moments, you know, and then you sort of get the satisfaction that they've obviously found an audience at some point, and, you know, that helps pay the mortgage and stuff. It means I, you know, have a slightly bigger attic now, but yeah, it's
I
amazing.
downloaded your music for free, actually.
Oh, good.
No, just kidding.
But it is extraordinary to see something so permanent that's been inspired by something so ephemeral as a song. I found that quite moving. And this is baffling to me. Well, it's not baffling because I've got used to my life being a series of things that should baffle me. But to come back to your question, I mean, Richard was a huge influence on me. In my 20s, and I guess, Douglas Adams is obviously a great friend of yours and a great friend of Peter's and lots of people. And I think I didn't listen to much Elton John. You know, my music influences are all Beatles and Kinks and Stones and people who used lyrics well, but not explicitly comedians. I didn't really know much about comedy. But what happened is, in my 20s, in my teens, I went and studied. I did an arts degree, and then I did a bit of music. And but I come from a scientific background. My dad and his dad are both surgeons and quite clear thinkers. And I guess when I studied arts, this is early 90s, so it was really the beginning of when relativism sort of started taking hold. And I just accepted it. I do remember studying postmodernism and thinking this is absolute rot, but I didn't have the capacity to I didn't have the capacity to articulate why back then. But off the back of that, I just started reading. I sort of went I didn't have religion particularly in my life ever, so there wasn't the radical change that you had to go through from your upbringing, or many people. I didn't have that wrench, but I kind of found science through an interest in really psychology and why people believe weird things. In fact, there was a book called who wrote Why People Believe? Michael Shermer. And there was a book by Francis Wheen called How Mumbo Jumbo Conquered the World, and which would now be seen as sort of right-wing or something, I suppose. But and none of these books appeared as Bibles to me. They were all just like, oh, some people think like that. And it just took me away from my postmodern relativistic arts education towards a real obsession with how do you know ideas are good. And then then I started reading Richard and, Hitch and all those boys. And but it intercepted with me suddenly having some success. So it wasn't so much that I started doing comedy about this stuff because I was a proselytizer for the ideas of science. It's that my interest was burgeoning at the same time as my audience was, and I just went, well, what I'm going to write about? Well, I happen to be reading about this stuff, and that's kind of how I became the guy who talks about these things. And of course, it self-perpetuates.
So most people who I would call secular activists actually came from some background, like
they're kicking against
someone,
them.
and they saw the harm that religion can bring to its own adherents as well as to others. But both you and Richard decided that this was something important, even though you came from a background that did not really in any way impair you or your family. Most people from secular backgrounds who may be atheists just think, live and let live. Something said to you, no, I have to go out and enlighten people. It's not enough for me to be intellectually rational or whatever. I need to help others. Can you recognize what that was?
Well, first, I'd like to say what a wonderful manifesto Tim just gave us. An impromptu manifesto was terrific. I suppose I came to it as a scientist, passionate about truth. And so, although I see a lot of the evil that religion does, I was much more interested in simply it being false. And I love truth, and I think that the truth is something so valuable, something that we should try to pass on to other people as far as possible. And therefore, that really is the wellspring of my hostility to religion.
I think that's right. There's these two definitions of the word right, and I always try and distinguish. One means correct and the other means moral, and I think Richard's mind, from my observations of your work over the years, finds, what you just said then, that you find something being incorrect like a thorn in you. You fucking hate it. And I really relate to that. I find it very, and it's not, speaking for myself, it's not always an attractive attribute, but it feels like a stone in your shoe that something is just wrong, as in incorrect. And then there's the other side, which is more what you're talking about, which is that it's wrong in a moral sense. And I think sometimes over the years I've come to think that it's important to distinguish the two, because religion or religious traditions and religious ideas are often right, as in moral. They're often good ideas, as in the moral impetus of the ideas, the lessons passed down in those books are very often, and the people who act on them are often very moral, but they're always incorrect. It doesn't matter how right or moral or immoral it is, they remain, they're based on a false premise. And I try to think very carefully about distinguishing them, mostly because as I've got a bigger audience, and obviously I'm sitting next to the biggest of the big fish in this space, so I have a tiny audience relatively, but it has made me think very carefully about the different. So Thank You God, for example, does have mostly I try to write about the places where religiosity meets bigotry, right? I'm interested in, the reason I wrote Cardinal Pell and stuff is because I try to, my justice module, which is probably a bit swollen, like my needing things to be right module, makes me want to call out a power system like religion when it's hurting people. But Thank You God's more just to this is a primer on the logical fallacies required to believe in the power of prayer. It's simply an educational document with rhymes. But it does sort of imply that there is something fundamentally immoral, and I know you feel this strongly, about the narcissism of it. However, the people who I know who are religious don't strike me as more narcissistic in their day-to-day life than my many narcissistic atheist friends. So there is something that really grates about the narcissism of believing prayer can fix your mum's eyes. But I don't think that means they're more narcissistic, so I try and distinguish those things. Sorry, I've just digressed. I don't know if there's something interesting in there if you look hard enough, I'm sure.
You mentioned the people who are hurt by religion. I think we've seen in the last few years a growing attention in the world to people who are hurt based upon sexual or gender, sexual orientation, race. But there's really, not only is there no attention really on people who are hurt by religion, but it's even somehow frowned upon to even confront religion and superstition. When do you think that will change? When will disbelief not be stigmatized anymore? When will it be accepted, or maybe even the norm? When does disbelief receive the same kind of sympathy as race and gender? When will that happen? When will it happen? What will make it happen?
I think in Australia we're in a very different place from the States. I think in Australia disbelief is the norm, with a big caveat there that our politicians are tilted way statistically differently from the population, because the churches are trying to get people in power because they really want them there, But you should.
Well, I think, David, you're quite right. There is a kind of taboo against speaking ill of religion, and one of the ways I notice this is that I'm sometimes accused of being strident. And I don't think I'm really strident, but I come over as strident because anybody who says anything even mildly anti-religious is heard as strident because it's so unexpected. It's so, historically there's been this taboo against saying anything against religion, and therefore if you say something really quite mild against religion, it is heard as though it was very strong, very, very aggressive. That's one of the manifestations of it, and that's got to change. Americans in our circle very often quote the astonishing fact that atheists in America are more despised than any other group, than rapists and
Satanists.
And that's an
Makes me
extraordinary...
proud. I'm a minority, yay! I've got, yeah. I think, I mean, I'm accused of being strident too, but I think you're strident sometimes, in the same way I am, in that what they're identifying is that stone in the shoe, is that like, yeah, but it just fucking ain't so. You know, the stridency comes from this sort of madness that you get into when you have these conversations, that there's this sort of special pleading all the time, and you just go, well, how are we, this is just bollocks, and so, yeah, you're right. And the thing you're identifying is the massive history of privileging those ideas beyond their inherent logical value. They are privileged by the fact that it begs the question. Religion begs the question. Most things seem to beg the question these days, including progressives. But anyway, we'll get there. It says it is special because it is special. You know, religion, virtually the definition of religion is stuff you're not meant to question. And there's hundreds and hundreds of years of that. And when I wrote my Pell song, and the right-wing press, you know, in Australia, of course, called me an anti-Catholic bigot and said I used foul language and stuff. And they probably deliberately completely missed the point, which is all I did is I wrote a song about him as if he was the head of some other institution. Like, what would you say about a man who covered up child abuse in his tennis coaching clinics? You know, if 40% of his tennis coaches were rapists and he knew about it and passed them to different tennis clinics around the country, how would you speak about him? And those right-wing journalists would go, foul, pedo, scum, put him in jail. But because Cardinal Pell wears a frock, you know, it is so... So all I was doing is trying to strip off the vestments, trying to strip away the gilt edges of witty of the stuff we just accept, and it's why abuse is so problematic and is just the height of the walls. So we can pull those walls down simply by treating them as non-sacred. So the non-sacred language is what you've been doing your whole career. You don't use abuse like I do. That's a tool of foul-mouthed convicts like me. But you just say, no, it's bollocks. And everyone goes, well, you can't say that. And you say, well, you have to say that. You know?
Yes.
So, the two of you.
He's not a nice guy either. George Pell's not a nice dude, so fuck him.
So Tim and Richard, do you ever hold your tongues? Do the practical necessities of having contracts and an audience or a faculty position, or does it ever force you to hold your tongue?
If I answer that, the answer is yes. And you're going to say, in what's an example? And obviously I cannot answer that.
Yeah, very nice.
Yes. Do you ever hold your tongue?
I hold my tongue all the time. And I hold it for lots of reasons, increasingly in the last 10 years, because anything you say can and will be taken out of context. You know, most of the things, as those of you who follow me on social media, the main thing I do these days is preach the principle of charity, that we should listen to each other's arguments through the best possible, the most generous possible filter, which, given that I made my name as a polemicist, might seem a bit after the fact and trite, but it's actually what I've always believed. I mean, I am not in my life the character in Storm. The point is, when I had that dinner party, which was nothing like that, but the thing that inspired that poem, of course, I didn't say a single word. I mean, all comedians are people who just think of the witty thing after they've left. You know, I'm going to get on stage and say I said this because I was too dumb to say it at the time. So I hold my tongue all the time, partly because you have to choose your battles, but mostly because I try to the extent that I have ever been an activist, or to the extent that I think my job is to spread good ideas, increasingly these days, as tribalism does this and this and this because of the fucking internet, I am trying to be a person who models a way of communicating that is not tribal, which means, when I started being a polemicist, it was an unusual thing to do. Now it's just every fucker, And so I want to model a way of communicating my ideas. So if you look at my social media feeds for the last 10 years, I don't think I've said anything rude in the face of all sorts of abuse. And so I try to think, will this have a positive effect? And if I don't think there's any way to have a positive effect on someone's ideas, I just shut up because I don't have the energy yet. I'm too tired of the shit that comes back. And I want to do good in the world, and stoking fires is sometimes good and very often not. Is that right?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's right. Pick your battles.
Pick your battles. I should have just said that.
So,
That's why you're the best-selling author and I'm this guy. Pick your words.
So 100 years from now, when we're changing the names on buildings and the zeitgeist has moved on to incorporate values that we don't think about today, people look back and say, oh, those people at that time of that century, they were terrible for X, Y, Z reasons. What will be the values, do you think, that 100 years from now people embrace that we don't really see today? Will it be sustainability? Will it be the vapid nature of the royalty? Will it be animal rights? What will be the causes that perhaps today we're all blind to?
I think animal rights is a good candidate. They are sentient beings, almost certainly, or at least many of them are. And there's no reason to suppose that they are less capable of suffering than we are. They may not be so bright as we are, so clever as we are, so intelligent as we are, but there's no correlation, no obvious correlation between intelligence and ability to suffer, to feel pain. I've sometimes speculated that, well, if you think about what pain is actually for in a Darwinian sense, pain is a warning to the animal not to repeat that action again. Don't do that again. This time it may be just painful, next time it'll kill you. So there is no obvious reason why a less intelligent species should feel less pain. On the contrary, you might expect a less intelligent species to feel more pain, because being less intelligent, it needs more pain in order to ram home the lesson of not to repeat this damaging act. So there is no clear Darwinian reason, biological reason, to suppose that humans, though we may be the acme of intelligence, are necessarily the acme of ability to suffer. On the contrary, it might be the reverse. So I think it's possible that in 100 years' time, to answer your question, David, they may look back on our time and think, how could they have been so cruel? Thinking of slaughterhouses, that kind of thing. Factory farming.
I think it is a clear candidate. What I'm interested in, and I shall be careful how I speak of it, is whether we'll look back at the social justice, the way we are going about social justice right now, and think it was just super fucking racist, because it's very essentialist, this movement that we should see colour more and identify each other by our exterior and assume a bunch of experiences. And I totally understand how that works, and I think I have my head around how it is functioning positively. but every now and then, when I'm sitting in a meeting with some American studio, there's a bunch of white people sitting around talking about just obsessed by the color of everyone's skin for the sake of social justice and affirmative action and all stuff that we all know we believe in. Sometimes I just go, oh, fucking hell, I swear in 50 years we're just going to think this was super fucking reductive and essentialist and just racist. So, but I hope I'm wrong, because I experience and see, both in my own understanding and in the industry I'm in, fantastic progress. But I do wonder whether, well, I know damn well nothing ages well. No set of ideas age well, but I can't help but think one that divides people very clearly into identities might age poorly.
I agree with that.
I hope I'm wrong. Doesn't feel quite like we're there yet. I know why we're going through this, but it doesn't feel like the way we talk about this is going to be like, yep, nailed it. We don't ever have to adjust our social justice, anymore. We've smashed it with this identity politics stuff. It's super. Yeah. Was I obtuse enough?
Oh, very, very clear.
I was once at a conference where there were about 30 of us around the table, and we all had to begin by saying who we were and what we did. And there was one African there who was a very black African. He was the only black person there. And he, after introducing himself, he said, "You can always tell me I'm the one with the red tie."
So good. So fucking good.
So you've both traveled around the world quite a bit, been exposed to many different continents and societies. Do either of you have a sense on how to crack the code on why some regions have embraced the ideals of the Enlightenment while others still grasp, antiquated superstitions and theological moralism? What is it about, say, Southeast Asia or Northeastern Europe that have made them more secular and rational, while other regions of the planet are still struggling with that?
I'm often asked that question with respect to America, which is an outlier, an anomalous outlier. And it's moderately easy to answer the question why the Islamic world lags behind, I think. It's a religion itself. But why should America, why should the United States of America be so out of line with the whole of Western Europe, shall we say? There are various theories about it. One theory is that it's because religion has become big business in America. These televangelists with their shiny suits and their Learjets and their Rolls Royces and Cadillacs, hugely successful financially, actually managing to persuade congregations that being rich is virtuous, and being poor is, God doesn't want you to be poor. God wants you to be rich. God wants you to be. I mean, the thing about the easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, they don't like that at all. I forget how they get around that, but
on a camel, probably.
yes. Possibly it's those European countries that have historically an established church, like we have here and like we have in Scandinavia. Because we have an established church, religion has become boring. It's what you do when you're married and when you die. Otherwise, you don't go near a church. Whereas in America, going to church is
Show business.
it's something that's done. You're expected to do it, and it's become a competition between different churches to lure people into their churches with all sorts of gimmicks. That's one theory. Another theory, I think, is that being a nation of immigrants, people getting off the boat from Europe historically feeling lonely and uncertain what's going to happen next. They've left their family behind, perhaps they've lost their family, lost their roots. And so to be embraced by a church is a substitute family. That's another theory I've heard. I don't know whether, I'm not American. Perhaps, David, you have ideas on why America is this anomalous point on the graph.
I don't. I'm asking the experts. That's
Okay.
what I ask the questions.
You do.
You give the answers, all right?
I believe them. I don't think I can speak to this. I could talk for half an hour and see if I stumble on something.
What about Australia? I mean, what is it that
Well,
you said
Australia's
this belief is
one of the most secular countries in the world, and something like 6% of Australians attend church. But yeah, there's a real push in the Pentecostal and Old Catholic. I live in a state where the new premier is a anti-abortionist, anti-gay marriage, old school Catholic, and the Prime Minister is a genuinely believes in prayer, and I don't think it's appropriate. I have pretty hardcore. I think if you can't look at the voters of Australia and say, I do not believe that Jesus can change physics in 2021, then I don't think you should be making decisions about anything. I just don't think you can interpret climate data if every Sunday you're praying and thinking it's going to change. I have a real problem with it, but other people don't, so that's fine. I mean, look, actually, Scott Morrison's a dick, buddy. I don't know how much he's a dick for Jesus. It's probably correlative and not causal, but it's hard to tell. And where do you draw the line? I think you should say I don't believe in supernatural stuff if you want to go into politics in a secular country, but it's a tough one because religion's not a binary, is it? It's a sliding scale of sort of supernatural beliefs go from touching wood all the way to the full thing.
But why, if Australia is such an irreligious country, do they elect a religious?
Because they just don't give a shit. They don't care about whether he's religious or not. They just don't want to give more tax. You know, it's just not. They don't think it matters as much as their tax breaks, I think. Which is probably fair enough. On a day-to-day level, they probably are more affected by the tax rate than whether Scott thinks old mate's magic.
So I will offer an answer though about America, which is that I think that increasingly secularism is taking hold, particularly among the young people. If you look at the Pew polls, 50% of Gen Zers would define themselves as unaffiliated. As you look through the generations, that number increases. It's the largest, unaffiliation for religion is the largest growing segment of the religious pie, if you will, in the United States. And I think what's happened is that what was a Christian majority is now a minority, and so that minority is desperately trying to hold on to power, to hold on to the privilege that they've enjoyed. When it was a majority, Christianity was not a partisan issue because it didn't matter to them. You said it didn't matter to Christians in America because they had it their way, if you will. And now they see their power and decreasing, and so they are a one-issue voter, and they will vote for whoever will put a Christian on the Supreme Court. And so they're a very powerful bloc. It's actually a decrease in the population that's causing an increase in political power.
But why don't politicians get the message and stop sucking up to the religious group?
Donors.
Why are non-religious people in America so uninfluential as far as electing politicians is concerned?
Well, because we care about other things. We care about climate, and we care about healthcare, and education.
So it's it divided loyalty between the different issues.
So both of you kind of make your livings, if you will, on the internet. And lately it's been vogue to demonize the most popular platforms on the internet, social networks like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as catalysts of misinformation, as purveyors of depression. It's vogue to describe these companies as having gone off the rails, so to speak. Do you think that's the case? Do you think they're under or over credited or blamed for our ills? And if you were king and you could regulate the technology industry in some way, would you, and how? It's a question for both of you. It's nice, it's fun to like say, oh, these companies, I hate them.
Yeah,
what
no,
would you actually
totally.
do?
It's a really interesting question.
You actually could make the rules that they had to follow differently. What would they be?
That's not the question I want to answer. I mean,
Answer the one you want to answer.
I think the internet is one of the wonders of the world. I think it's absolutely fabulous. I don't think that Twitter is absolutely fabulous. I've never tried Facebook, but I don't think that is either, probably. But the fact that in my own room I can access all the wisdom in the world just without, I don't have to get up and even cycle to the Bodleian Library. I mean, it's there, right there on my computer screen. Wikipedia, I think, is a marvel. I would never have believed that Wikipedia could have worked. If somebody had come to me and I've forgotten what his name, the founder of Wikipedia is, and if he'd come to me...
He emails me all the time for money.
And pitched the idea of Wikipedia, I'd have thought, don't be so silly, it can't possibly work. But it does, and it really is amazing. And whenever I look up something that I know something about, I'm astonished at how accurate it is, and that boosts my confidence in the other things. So I thoroughly in favor of the internet, and I think that inevitably there are going to be bad sides to it, and the freedom of anonymous trolls to let off steam is an inevitable byproduct, which we suffer as a byproduct of this wonderful new gift to humanity.
I sort of think it would be better if the internet was never invented, but I think, but I completely agree. I suspect social media is kind of existentially damaging. I think the fact that it is a confirmation bias robot is a human experiment being done with groups of primates that is properly scary. I think how quickly it has made us think issues are all binary and has increased the spotlight on the extreme because the algorithms, combined with human nature, reward outrage and fury, so that we think issues are accurately represented by actually what are the most extreme views. I don't know how to police it because I also am acutely aware of the slippery slope problem of any regulations on speech. I have in the past had arguments with people about hate speech laws and stuff, which I obviously intuitively understand why we should have laws that stop people being hateful. You can ban saying the Holocaust isn't real, or you can ban the use of certain abusive words, but you shouldn't make laws that in the hands of a conservative government can be used to shut down Black Lives Matter, for example. So there's huge problems with regulation of free speech and huge problems with the idea of a private company being told to put a truth filter on the content that gets posted on. I mean, how do you police that? I think it's fucked. I think social media is awful, and I'm completely addicted to it. I also think humans can't deal with the amount of information we have access to and are very bad at managing our circle of concern. Our circle of concern and the information we have got throughout history has always been curated through tiny little pipes. We worry about our family and our village. We know about the local news. You know, maybe if you open to the international pages, a couple of stories about what's going on overseas. You know, I've got teenagers with anxiety disorders, and my hypothesis is simply that they've just got too much shit coming into their brains. And I feel like that too. I have to actively manage my circle of concern. I've radically chosen to stop because it was damaging my mental health, and that was damaging my children. I was constantly upset because I was reading fucking Twitter. And I think everyone is, because we haven't evolved to be able to have our circle of concern infinite. It's not healthy, this impulse we have that it is an ethical impetus to worry about everything that's going on in the world. What do you mean you don't know about this issue in, you know, Chinese Communist Party killing Muslims? What do you mean you haven't read about that? There's a sense that to know is in itself ethical, but it's a fallacy. Knowledge about other people's suffering is not a moral impetus. Doing something about it is, which means you have to choose what you can change. And we're just awash in anxiety, screaming at each other. No one's doing shit. They're posting their black squares and sitting in their fucking lounge room, you know?
Right.
Anyway, I have no opinion on it. Yeah.
It feels like, just like our bodies don't know how to stop us from eating more
Yeah,
sugar,
that's right.
we evolved looking for validation and affection from the people in our little clan.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to say enough, and so we seek likes and loves from thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000, as many likes as we can get all the time, and we're just constantly posting for likes, looking for likes.
And you get the most if you say something absolutely.
Right.
I mean, I bought a house on that shit.
So King Timothy I, you make no rules to change it except kind of a public education campaign that says go on a like diet.
Yeah.
Stop worrying about so many likes, moderate yourself, and it's up to us as individually to have social health just like we have physical health.
I agree about Wikipedia. It's the most extraordinary creation of humankind. And by the way, if you're one of those people who thinks it's funny to fuck
Jimmy
with...
Wales is his name.
Jimmy Wales, yeah.
Yes.
When people are like, oh, I edited Wikipedia, you're just like, oh my God, if you're going to respect anything in the world, try and respect Wikipedia, because it's extraordinary. But, you know, it feels to people like us that knowledge is a fundamental good. I don't know, you know, I think a lot about what level of ignorance is a good level of bliss. And this might be something we could argue about because we're furiously agreeing on everything, but you know, I care very much about truth and stuff, and the reason we love the scientific method and stuff is because everything's sort of, you can falsify it and you can get there. With logical philosophy as well, you can get there. But with what should we do about the internet, and how do you deal with immigration, and should we have a borderless world, and should there be a global currency, and is it moral to put someone to death if they put someone to death? These philosophical questions, I mean, should everyone be engaged at the highest level with all the information about every ethical issue in the world? I think it's going to kill us. So yeah, I'm all tied up about it.
Well, we evolved to live in small villages where you knew everybody, and you got your likes from half a dozen people.
Yeah. And you know who you're going to save in the fire. You know? Yeah. It'd be my son. Daughter's a pain.
So your instinct to tell people what's right, what would you say to your terminally ill loved one who thinks she's going to heaven?
Ricky Gervais made a movie about that, didn't he?
Well, I wouldn't disabuse them. I don't think. I mean, I write my books and people can read them, but I wouldn't go to my terminally ill relative who believes they're going to heaven and say, no, you're not.
Yeah. Goodbye, Mum. Oh, one more thing.
Yes.
So there's some degree of, like you said, blissful ignorance, sometimes where you take the blue pill and you say,
I mean, I would never disabuse anyone of their magical belief anywhere in any situation, unless they want to come to my show and hear my songs or go to the bookshop and buy Richard's book. I've been thinking a bit about, when you're thinking about populations, there's two very different ways I think about people, and I think we all do, but we might not identify it, and I'm sure people have written about this, and I'm not going to say something interesting, but when you're talking about populations, data is all that matters. And this is where I jut up against the new social justice and identity and stuff, this idea that how someone feels about something matters and the data doesn't. I think in populations, when you're making policy decisions and ethical decisions about the world, all that matters is data. Feelings don't matter because feelings fuck with data. Your feelings about the vaccine don't matter. You should get it because the data says you should get it. And I don't know what else. If you feel like, you know, you're a victim of certain behaviours, you think the cops kill your people more than other people, if the data doesn't support it, then don't care what you feel about that, right? That's populations. Individuals, all that matters is feelings. By which I mean, you have to treat individuals in a way that is not cruel and is supportive and can help them and can help them move forward. And maybe at a time that might be, can we talk about your belief about this because that's fucking you up, or that's making you mean to gays, or whatever. Sorry, no, I've gone down a cul-de-sac. I just think I would never tell a religious person that their religion's wrong unless it's hurting someone. It only matters to me when it's hurting someone, and when you look at the population, you can see how it is. And you want to speak out against that. If an individual is saying, I don't want to vote for gay marriage, I'll say, well, maybe it's because you have the wrong ideas about Jesus. You know? But mostly, my main job is to make people happy. I mean, that's what I actually do for a job, you know, I think. Try.
Do a good job of that.
Thanks. Except for the people who are just like, fuck, I'm starving. He just talks and talks and talks.
well, speaking of what you do,
Over Richard Dawkins.
Speaking of what you do, can you each tell us a little bit about what's next? What are you working on? And if either one of you influenced the other in terms of what you're doing, that would be bonus. I know, for example, I can tell you that at Center for Inquiry, where we talk about promoting secular thought and science and rationalism, we have come to appreciate that there's a place for magazines and scholarship and tweets and conferences and all of that. But ultimately, if you want to open someone's mind to truly assess, to be critical, to reflect, the best way to do it is through stories, through character, and through humor, like you do. And entertainment is a very sneaky way to disarm someone and get them to start to
people
think about
swallow
someone
anything while
else's
they're
journey.
laughing,
Yeah, to think about someone else's journey, which...
I'm surprised Jesus didn't crack more gags.
So what are you working on next, and are you thinking about this, and how, tell us what you're both thinking about.
I'm writing a book called The Genetic Book of the Dead, which I've only just started really, but about 3 chapters in. The idea is that any animal, especially its genes, but the animal body itself, is a kind of description of the worlds in which its ancestors survived. So you can read the body of the animal as a readout, as a description of ancient worlds. So that's
For example?
In the case of genetic of the genes, it actually is a more direct rendition. But anyway, they haven't got very far with that.
Can you share an example of what we can see? What genetic history of an organism?
Well, if you look at the teeth of an animal, for example, if it's got flat millstone slab-like teeth, that's a herbivore. That's a description of past plants. The most direct way in which an animal is a description of its ancestral world is, of course, camouflaged animals. An animal that has its background painted on its back. It's not its background, it's the ancestral background in which its ancestors were naturally selected. That is a description of the world in which its ancestors lived. Well, that's that book. We've got a book coming out, Jana and I have got a book coming out in November called Flights of Fancy, which is about flight in animals and humans. And November the 11th, I think, coming out. Yeah. Tim, what are you working on?
I'm not writing any books. I've come to the same conclusion, even to the extent that all the beautiful things you've said about what I do. I mean, it's sort of 10 years since I really wrote anything as direct as Thank You God or Storm or whatever. I sort of think there's a time and a place for that in your career, and at a certain point the sort of power that you get renders that a little bit less charming. To be a 46-year-old white guy banging on about how your beliefs are stupid, I'm hyper aware of that, but that doesn't mean, my worldview is all through Matilda. Mrs. Wormwood says what you know matters less than the volume with which what you don't know is expressed. My satire about anti-intellectualism is even in my children's musical, and it's certainly in Groundhog Day, and it's in Upright, and I think you're right. What I want to be a part of in what feels like a very divided world, and maybe that's just my confirmation bias, but it feels real. I want to create human stories about humans having human experiences that allow people to see that we're all the same rather than keep noticing how we're different. I'm making another season of... basically I write TV shows now, and I try to make sure the stories say something about the human condition, because I think that's what we've lost in our desperation to strive for social justice and strive to get our ideas across and strive to define ourselves as right and other people wrong and stuff. I definitely feel like it's kind of politically cool to define yourself in opposition to one another rather than to understand your membership of the human family. And I'm just trying to write stuff about what it's like to be a human being and try and make it funny and try and make people cry and laugh, because as you say, once they're crying and laughing, you can stuff a little idea in there.
Yeah. Well, you're mainstream now.
I'm mainstream, yeah, that's right.
When you have a Broadway musical production like Groundhog Day, you can put in a line in the song about medical quackery. You might as well be sitting home and praying.
Yeah.
Which
I stuffed a lot of stuff into that. Some people didn't like it.
Yeah. So you can use your platform to more subtly expose people to certain ideas that, as they're listening to the song, they say, "Well, wait a minute. What does he mean by that? I might as well be sitting home and praying."
Yeah.
And just with that one little line, maybe create a seed of doubt.
I'd like to have as broad an audience as possible for all the obvious reasons, but if you're going to tell stories, you don't want to make a bunch of people feel like they have to walk out. I don't want anyone to not consume my art. I would hate for any particular sector to feel unwelcome, although obviously if you're religious, you're not going to love my shows, but I hope you'll come and sit and take them in the spirit they're meant, and maybe have some thoughts about some stuff, some thoughts about your thoughts, some metacognition.
Now, have you two met each other before?
Yeah.
Yes.
Heaps.
We had dinner together in Los Angeles.
We had a brief affair in New York. I think this is our third time. I don't know. Memorable though, weren't they? Yeah, we had dinner with, it's just when I try not to name drop, but I like, it's fucking extraordinary that I'm in Oxford with these. So every now and then I do name drop, and my favourite name drop story is having dinner with Richard and Stephen Fry in an LA restaurant. And Stephen got really animated. He does sometimes.
Yes.
He's a big dude with a big voice and a big brain. Yes. He loves his beer.
So you're here now in the UK. You're about to kick off a new tour. Can you tell us about what you're doing?
Yeah, so this is back, and it's the tour I did in 2019, and we sold it out. So as we have in the past, we're like, well, let's just go around again, and then it got put off 2 years. So it's changed a bit. Subtitled old songs, new songs, fuck you songs, which I called it that, so people knew I was going to be playing some old stuff. But as I say, I don't really do punchline comedy songs anymore, just because I think I've done that, and that was fine. I do, the sort of centerpiece of my back show is a 10-minute rant about confirmation bias. So I'm still just nerding out. I mean, really, I have this platform, and what I want to say more than anything now, much more than, I mean, I play Thank You God in this song and in this show, and, you know, some of that old stuff, but I sort of want to scream, stop kicking people out of your tribe who don't agree with you 100%. I want to scream it. And I can't believe anyone disagrees, but we don't disagree. No individual person thinks public shaming as a mechanism for change, you know, driving a person to suicide is wicked. We just don't realise that every like is a potential mob. And I think that conversation about our moral obligation to see the potential of our membership of tribes, I think that's the important conversation about social media. And I don't know how you do it, but I don't know. I just feel like an old guy, you know, saying stop being mean. You know, and there's hypocrisy in me saying that, obviously, because I've been quite mean. But I don't think I've ever been mean to an individual, and I've always found public shaming, even of people I hate, incredibly distasteful, and I'm shocked constantly by the people I see happily engaging in it. I just don't understand it. I guess it's because I'm privileged and I've never felt the rage, but I don't know, I feel pretty angry sometimes. But yeah, so that's what I'm preaching now. I'm trying to preach. I'm trying to preach that othering others is not going to make the world a more peaceful place.
And when someone does get cancelled by cancel culture, do you feel like...
I don't love that phrase, because everyone's like, they weren't cancelled, they've still got a job. But yes, I know what you mean. Sorry. You know what I mean? Because I know half the audience will be like, cancel culture doesn't exist, but public shaming does, whatever you think about. Yeah.
Do you feel like you can publicly come in defense of the individuals?
No.
Right. So this is where you still...
No, I definitely don't speak up on behalf of people I would like to speak up on behalf of, because I'm too cowardly, because I don't want to get caught up. And everyone does it all the time.
I think we're all cowardly.
Yeah, well, you have to be.
Yes.
And that's terrible.
Well, we don't have to be. I mean,
No.
maybe if enough of us were not cowards,
I know, it's terrible. Sometimes I've been there. I've been up all night with my wife, like shaking, waiting for something that someone posted to hit, something old I said that someone had deliberately tried to center in the middle of a thing, and just thinking, this is it. And so that makes it sound like a self-interested thing. I just know what it feels like to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people go after you, which happens to me usually when I'm doing something I feel very morally safe about, like the Cardinal Pell thing. It's just like waves and you can't stop reading. And I think people think it's all a game, but it's not. It's where we exist. It's where our society is now. So if you wouldn't do it in the real world, don't do it online, basically. And you should just do that every time. Every time you're ever online, don't say or do anything you wouldn't be able to say if they were in front of you. Why is that? I mean, how is that? It's not even fucking radical, is it? I mean, it's obvious. Just treat people how you would like to be treated. Jesus frickin' said it on some other dude.
So it's very hard to know where that line is between criticizing someone who's hurting people, because you said
Yeah,
you've got to champion
it is.
those
It's
who are
not
being
that simple.
oppressed, and then stopping short of villainizing those people to the
Yeah.
point where there's no way for them to come back. There's no way for them to say, oh, you're right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Now, how do we
And it's hard, and obviously there's a whole conversation. It's very easy to misrepresent one's own ideas, because obviously social media and public shaming have been used to create extraordinary movements that have had extraordinarily good outcomes. So I guess I'm speaking as if I have moral clarity on this, and I don't. It's, as always, much more complicated than you want it to be. But, you know, it's not hard to differentiate between a rapist and someone who says some words you don't like, actually. We just want it to be the same because we feel the same outrage, but do unto others is, I mean, it really is. You just have to go, how would I feel if this was my brother or my sister or my cousin, and try and act like that.
Right.
I think.
So let's try to end on a bright note. I'd just like to ask each of you to reflect upon what right now brings you the most joy in life.
Who's your favorite clown?
Is it clowns? Is that what brings you joy?
Oh, I hate clowns.
What was the question?
What brings you joy?
What brings you joy in life right now? More than anything else right now, these days.
It's been a lovely day today. It's wonderful to be in Oxford at now, and just to be able to give Tim this award has been a great joy to me, and it's something I've looked forward to for a long time.
Has it not been a bit tedious because I talk too long? Like, you can tell me, I can take it.
No, far from it. No.
Well, I've had an amazing, it is, yeah, it's weird what you get used to. Like, I'm sitting here going, yeah, that's all right. Talk to old man Dawkins and old mate Dave, and sitting in Oxford. Yeah, it's, you know, half my brain's like, yeah, this is my life, it's normal, and half my brain's going, what's going on? So yeah, it's been absolutely beautiful, and I haven't been able to come to the UK for 2 years, so I'm just wandering around Oxford in a dream because I miss this little country of yours a lot.
Well, I hope to go to Australia soon.
Yeah, come, have dinner.
Yeah.
I think I've had a real, I've got much better at finding joy in the things you should find joy in, you know. I get a lot of joy out of exercise and swimming around from Coogee Beach to Gordons Bay and the ocean and stuff, and I identified about a year and a half ago that I was, just to come back to this anxiety, if I can offer anyone anything, that I was consuming too much news and information and having the sense that I should be helping. And I'm much, much happier consciously restricting my circle of concern, which requires that you dedicate yourself to the circle of concern to make sure you are doing good. And once you've decided you're at the edge of what good you can do, just stop eating all that anxiety, you know. So I'm finding joy in, you know, the stuff you should find joy in, because I'm managing my circle of concern better.
Well, that's been, I've taken away a lot of great messages from tonight, and I think we're all just kind of blown away with the depth of your thoughts about your work and the need for more rationality in the world. I think we've come to the end of our time, and I think I speak for everyone when I say that I am so grateful for your decision to come join us today, and I think it just affirms Richard's decision to name you as this year's winner of the Richard Dawkins Prize. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we'll all be consuming your work, all your content with great enthusiasm. Thank you very much, Tim.